to see such a great turnout. After yesterday, I heard, which was also a great turnout in its own right. And I'm sure that this exhibition and the various events attached to it will become a memorable event for people in Nottingham and in Britain. I'm just going to start by giving you a format that we will follow this afternoon. I'm going to provide a very short introduction to Rashid Rana and his work, which will be followed by a conversation which will last roughly 30 to 40 minutes. And I'll try to ask him questions not only about his work, but his position as an artist working in Pakistan. And hopefully we will look at his work from what has happened now, going backwards. And I'll ask after that if we can have some questions from the audience. As we are talking, it'd be really great if you can formulate these questions accordingly, if you can compose things about both Rashid's career, his ideas, and his works. Because I do think that what Rashid is doing at the moment is incredibly important. And I know that when I've worked with people in India, they've also found his work very important. And that's something which is also maybe we can touch on at a later stage, because it's also quite controversial. I know that many of you are familiar with Rashid's work and have maybe had the chance not only to see the exhibition downstairs, but possibly also had a prior look at it at the Listen Gallery in London, and maybe at the Corner House in Manchester that Alnu just talked about. I've been familiar with Rashid's work for a number of years, having worked with him with an exhibition which I curated in Mumbai for Bodhi Art in 2008, called Everywhere is War and Rumors of War. Prior to that, and even since then, his work has been upheld by a number of curators and also critiques. As one of those artists favored both, but the rise of criticality and thinking in his work in terms of what is going on in Southeast Asia, but also how, to a certain extent, it is a bridging mechanism between that thinking and the market, the commercial galleries and art fairs, which are now very much part of what is going on in the region. And that is something which is very unique in the sense that the infrastructure for Asia is very different to the infrastructure in Europe. And one must heed that to understand his success in both regions. This firm position that Rashid occupies within now what can be seen as within the global realm has been justified by the large amount of exhibitions in which he has participated, as well as the range of publications that cite his work, which to a certain extent is not the same for people who are in a similar position to him in India, who have not participated in the wide range of exhibitions that he has, especially museums in France and America. So again, this is a unique situation that he finds himself in. So in a sense, what this suggests, that there is a kind of identification with his concern, maybe a kind of a geographical identification about his concerns. His large-scale solo exhibition at the Museum Guimet in Paris, with his notions of site-specific interventions in an Eastern collection, as well as the inaugural exhibition at the National Gallery in Islamabad, are very different to the exhibitions that he has held in Delhi and Mumbai, in galleries such as Nature Mort and Chatterjee and Lal. But since 2000, Rashid has been exhibiting in Lahore and Karachi. His group exhibitions extend, as I suggested, from cities in North America, including the seminal Beyond the Page, the Miniaturist Attitude and Contemporary Art from Pakistan, at the Pacific Asia Museum in Pasadena, in 2010, to Hanging Fire, Contemporary Art from Pakistan at the Asia Society in New York in 2009. These are large, very large-scale exhibitions which we haven't held, which haven't been held in this country, let alone in many other countries, because of the way that the systems of exhibition making works. The list, when one goes through his CV, remains extensive and literally global. Exhibitions in Australia, England, Singapore, and China, to name a few. And I'm sure more museums and more galleries will exhibit his work for the public, who seem to be perplexed and intrigued by his compositions and his method of making work. A publication is pending that accompanies this exhibition with an introduction by the curators Alnur Mithra and Sarah Perks, as well as a ubiquitous interview by Hans Ulrich Obrist and a catalogue essay by David Elliott. All of this talks about a level of understanding, but also a level of reaching a specific type of summit for an artist from that region. So I'd like to welcome Rashid Rana and thank him for participating in this talk.
Thank you so much for such kind words and such elaborate introduction.
It's all right. My pleasure. This is where the kind words end, I think, now.
I sense that.
You did, yes. You know, it's always nice to make somebody comfortable before the dark hour. All right, so I'd like to start with the current exhibition. And as I suggested, move back in time. I'd like to start with a very specific observation, which I've taken from the time I saw it first in Manchester. In the recent work, the signature, which is very much Rashid Rana, the signature style that people recognize as Rashid Rana, this composite of macro and micro, where hundreds of images are dramatically redigitized to make provoking experiences, which I call nearly hallucinatory, because once one starts looking into your work, you get lost. And in that sense, we find ourselves in other realities, and maybe composed realities. This has shifted dramatically into a three-dimensionality recently, into a sculptural arena, which was in a way I was shocked by when I saw it in Manchester. I missed the listen show, sorry, so I didn't get it at first hand there. Maybe it would be interesting to talk about how you arrived at these two types of physical experiences, and I call them physical experiences because within them the signature still continues. There's an onslaught. And in the current experience, you suggest everything happens at once. And I literally like that idea, that it does happen at once. I'm walking around and I'm walking into your images. How did you come into this three-dimensionality?
Well, as you most of you know, that I was trained as a painter, and my practice of painting evolved such that I ended up using lots of photo content, and I still do not call myself a photographer, as I do not qualify as one. However, there has been a use of abundance of photographic images and content in my work for the last 10 years. So arrival to photo-based works was mostly idea-led. This was the ideas who led the way and made me use this medium. But in doing so, I realized that I am not a purist, but it's quite intense use of one medium for such a long time. And I started looking at photography with a deeper sort of interest. In the sense, not in terms of photography as a formal discipline, but photography more as a subject also. How, since its invention, it has been, it provide a kind of background to all what is happening in a larger sense. To begin with, how photography changed the face of art, role of artist, and it was changed, and how we see such different kind of art produced since then. And then it took so many decades to first time artists to realize that photography can be used as a subject matter itself in the photorealist movement in the 1970s, which is very underrated. And then the arrival of people like Sherman and Struth and Demand, and which takes photography into the realm of painting in a way, conceptual painting, if you may want to call it. But anyway, I started looking at photography and history, and the fact that I'm using photo-based content a lot in my work, and I realized that maybe I could. This is a medium, and it doesn't have to be passive medium. It can become a potent, active content in the making of the work. This was the basic premise from which I started working in these photo sculptures. My another, if you look at my practice from early 90s, one of my major recurring sort of element in my work is my interest in two-dimensionality, and the basic fuel for my practice for all these years has been this fascination and this question how throughout the history makers of two-dimensional art deal with the idea of space. It's just fascinating. Though I haven't approached it in my practice as a purist, but this has been there throughout. So with that understanding looking at photography as a subject matter, these two interests joined together and then led to making of these photo sculptures. And primarily what I'm trying to do is, instead of taking a two-dimensional photograph, I'm taking multiple photographs of three-dimensional object. So essentially I'm doing the same thing what photography, a single photograph does, in which you record light and darks, and they create the illusion of something which in these time we find extremely believable. Nobody questions the illusion of photography, and so I just thought it'll be interesting to make this medium more humble and kind of expose its limitations. So if you put them together in form of multiple photographs from multiple angles, lights and darks, they do get recorded as an illusion, but when you bring them together and dislocate them into another context of gallery, they still look somewhat believable because of the familiarity and recognizability of the object. But as soon you realize this sort of simultaneous shift between its illusion and its limitation and as a medium, and as well as so you just constantly shifting between that. So this was my interest in creating these photo sculptures, and to enhance this this constant shift between this real thing and its illusion is I think enhanced by the pixelation, because pixelation is another thing that we associate with two-dimensionality. Another formal device that I have been interested in throughout my career, the use of grid, which initially started as an interest in Zuhur al-Akhlaq's work, legendary artist from Pakistan, and also looking at post-war American art, where grid becomes the emblem of two-dimensionality. So now I bring two-dimensionality from the pixelation, what we associate with computer screen or television, into third dimension. So that also, so when you're looking at from distance, it looks like something you believe in. This is a refrigerator, and you come close, so it sort of pixelates and this exposes itself as an illusion. And so this is another aspect of this work. In terms of subject matter, I tried that I would use something very simple and mundane, as opposed to politically charged imagery, which was also intentional for a number of years. Yeah. And I remained interested in form throughout my career, but in terms of enticing the viewer, the wider audience to my work, I felt this is an age where we're all into issues and political issues, and its amalgamation with the popular culture. So that I have been doing for some time, but then I wanted a break from that. So this is more from a personal need. I just thought I should just pick simple objects. It's the way I make it, it's the formal concern which will make it from this time, and not necessarily anything else. So I just thought I'll just divide it from any kind of political sort of loaded message and just keep it very simple, but I failed. it doesn't happen exactly in that fashion. Perhaps we can talk. I'll conclude my answer here, but maybe we can talk about the plinth and the step, and then we can.
I mean, we're looking at images at the back,
right,
which are of those. I think in this exhibition there are around 5, which is the newspaper, the books, the fridge, the step, and the plinth.
right.
Now, I had thought of them as maybe the way I had concluded. There was a kind of a softness attached to these objects. But there was also kind of a pop cultural contemplation. And in many ways, art from both India and Pakistan has had a great amount of contemplation on popular culture. But within that, there was another thing which you added, which was a conceptual nature of perception. That, in a sense, there was deception. And I heard from one of the people, the staff, I think Melanie suggested, some people put their wine glasses on the plinth yesterday, not knowing that this was a sculpture. So it wasn't just an illusion, it was an absolute deception. That they thought they were with an object which they could use. So I think you were very successful, in a sense, of dislocating the notion of an illusion in the way that the people responded to it. And the last person I remember who had played with the notion of the newspapers was Robert Gobber in his show at the Serpentine. And I think there's a number of things which happens with these works, is that you discover the notion of illusion in your work. But that's been something which has been also part of your past work. There's a sense of discovery. Sure. You walk into something which you think is one thing, and then you realize it's something else completely, and shockingly you sort of leave and just kind of go away thinking I'm looking at something very Islamic, and it turns out to be something incredibly pornographic, right, as in The Veil. So there's a kind of duality, shifting for the audience, which you deliberately play with. And I sort of thought about it. I thought, this is a kind of a double illusion. You know, 1, twice, and then 3 times you sort of kind of walk away. And I'm looking at these works from the time of Manchester to here, and I'm still sort of, in a way, shocked by them, coming from you, because it's such a shift from the highly, highly contaminated, mesmeric amount of images to a very simple contemplation. And I'm still thinking, this is a gigantic shift. And where is that shift coming from? I'm still asking that question.
I think it's also deceptive that it's gigantic, the shift. Because deep down, if you look at both mosaic series and these photo sculptures, formal concerns are pretty much similar. It's just the manifestation is different. As I said, you know, for some time, parallel to my other works, I just wanted to balance it. You know, if
but
you recall
what happened at that? You talked about the dropping of the political,
right?
Which I think is interesting,
right?
Because Pakistan has become as political as it can get,
right?
And you are in a sense suggesting I had to drop it for an aesthetic.
Right.
Now, there's also a shift of your work from what can be said as maybe the medium ladder to a very high ladder in the art world.
Right.
How are all of these things affecting you?
I think I feel from an artist's point of view, whether that artist chooses to have an audience of 50 people or 200 or 500, 1,000, it's a very personal decision. It can come at various times of his or her career. If you look at my early grid paintings from 90s, they were rather subtle, and they were also conceptual. They were also deceptively abstract. They were not abstract in the true sense of the word. In a way, all the major recurring elements in my practice, whether duality and this play with the abstraction and representation, the synthesis of pop and minimalist and conceptual aesthetics, they were all have been there. It's just that there have been shifts in approaches as to how I want in a given time wanted to manifest those ideas, constantly evolving ideas, into physical form. So there was a desire around mid-90s, after having done those grid paintings, that I want to access wider audience. I'm not happy with just sharing my work or being content that 20 people will like my work or will engage with my work. So this is how this shift came about initially, not before the mosaic paintings. I'm just giving you a sort of a background. So in the mid 90s, that change led to being open to so much imagery and so much imagery from the popular culture, from broad visual culture. And then having gone through that, and I enjoyed that phase, because the goal that I set for myself, I think I completely succeeded in doing that.
Yeah.
And I did build a wider audience where the work that I made with a clear intention that I was competing with the world of advertisement. Scale, this is why it plays an important role. The kind of familiarity of the macro image for lots of people plays an important role. But these are sort of devices to entice people into a piece, and then if there's anything deeper, that can reveal itself later if there's any. Right. And so having dealt with so many images like that, there was somehow personal need to change the taste of the mouth and do something different. Yeah. But having said that, as I was saying that I wanted to sort of depoliticize it a bit. It didn't happen exactly entirely in this case. For example, when I was making this series of work for Listen last year, I produced these works in 2 lots, and from 2007 until now, they're not very recent, all of these. So I was passing through a village which I do on daily basis from my studio to home, and the drive is only 7-8 minutes. But Lahore, as many of you would know, that it's a society where lots of unevenness is there in terms of progress. So you are going through various times and eras all at the same time. So I saw a step made of loose bricks in front of a shop where you just stand on it and then buy hardly 5 or 6 items that all they sell, very basic. So for a moment I just think, oh, this looks like Carl Andre's work, and I also know that what it is, what purpose it serves here. It's a simple object, and this is what I've been trying to do. Just take simple objects, and the way I make it, that was going to be the content, and not so much the loadedness of any particular thing. But I couldn't help it when I saw that, just because I know what Carl Andre's work is like, and I'm seeing that in it. So that is a reality. So I didn't want to like totally discard it. Right. I mean, we see what we know, and so unnecessarily suppress that wasn't healthy either. So I just thought it would be interesting if I just dislocate it, because that's who I am. And when people use the word, I mean, since I think it seems that we're going to be talking a lot about Pakistan as well. So it is not a place where you can just pinpoint, that this is Pakistan, or women from Pakistan are like this, or certain things from Pakistan is like this. I'm from there, and yet I'm also exposed to many cultures and places, and art as a knowledge, collective and shared knowledge. As I mentioned, I knew Carl Andre's work, so I wanted all these layers to come into play in these works. So yes, they are in their first appearance, they're probably relatively subtle, but I think deep down the concerns are pretty much similar and simultaneously evolving.
All right, that's great. Going back to just the term you used, we see what we know.
Is my mic working? Can you guys hear me?
Okay. We see what we know. In many ways, the earlier work, let's say, if we go back to this idea of a political strategy, in essence, we used to describe your experience of truth, culture, and maybe even of your life experiences. So I remember those images of sort of macho movies of like Rambo, and then there would be all sorts of images from Pakistan of destruction. So in a sense, you were coalescing the two things. And your adult history as an artist is of studying in North America, but then living and making in Lahore. And I'm just wondering, as you just suggested, you have this relevance of both spaces and both histories in mitigating difference. Difference of maybe an art education, and as a student, looking at that very rich history of North American art and being taught that, and then going back to Pakistan and having to look at that reality, as you said, an unevenness which occurs there, from incredibly rich to the incredibly poor, literally next to each other, and within the same space. So I'm just wondering, how do you collect? Because I also look at this that you are collecting images all the time and then regurgitating them literally into forms which make sense and then don't make sense simultaneously. You move away from it a tiny bit and you become involved in something else and you see something else all of a sudden. So in one way, what I'm suggesting is that there are the systemic ways of you're providing images and regurgitating images. And I'm wondering, how does that happen? How do you actually collect all these images physically? And what happens? Are you some sort of archivist?
First of all, my education, only later part of my education was in North America.
Your postgraduate course?
Yes, my what they call postgraduate in UK, yeah.
Yeah.
But prior to that, I was trained at the school in Lahore, and even while I was there, I was into, I had this great desire to find out whatever is happening anywhere else in the world. So I landed in this school where I was hoping that my class fellows would know more than, would also be on the same page. So I also tried to be on the same page, and I was familiar with all the latest developments of postmodernism and all what was happening in the New York scene, only to find out there that most of the faculty over there were very modernist, still with the hangover of modernism, and I was the odd one out there. So anyway, I wanted to touch
it's
that.
Interesting. It's important.
So no, this is why, I mean, it's not something that I acquired or accumulated while I was in North America. Pakistan is a very open, is a place with lots of porous borders in every sense of the word. And when we talk about Pakistan, I was just recently having a discussion with Chris Lydon, the broadcaster from who did a series of interviews, very interesting series, highly recommended if you want to check it out on the web. He picked different artists and writers, and then he did the series. So I was talking to him about Pakistan because it was specifically focusing on Pakistan, not my practice as such. And I just shared with him how I, somebody from who's based there, look at Pakistan, and because what you know from media is a very, because of its limitation, it's a very narrow window. It only gives you some percentage of what you cannot see beyond the frame. Pakistan is no different than the rest of the world. If anything, it is probably a small model of the entire globe. What our globe consists of is extreme polarity. This unevenness is in the entire world also. There's a bit of everything, whatever is happening in the entire world, whether rich people not giving taxes or some other thing happening, or there's a culture of intelligentsia elite, or all the ingredients that are there in the entire world that you see are miniaturized into a small. So Pakistan is not what we see in the media, the trouble that you see, the Afghan and Pakistani border, and that small footage that you see. Pakistan is just like the rest of the world, except it has all the ingredients that are there in the globe, they miniaturized in a small version. So this can provide a very basic entry to looking into Pakistan, and then expanding from there. So about your second part of being archivist, yeah, I started realizing it didn't start as a well thought out strategy. Two things: that one, to have this archivist or encyclopedic aspect to my practice, and also the fact that I have used many subjects and themes and images from Lahore, and this happened, I think, gradually, and now, but I can analyze it. I mean, I can look back and see that how much interested I'm in there. I'm in Lahore, and so my belief in the fact that cities are perhaps much more real and important than the countries. Countries, the political borders change, all the time, and in a longer period of history, in centuries, or you would see different names and different political sort of demarcation. Cities will always be there. Lahore has always been there. It may grow or organically expand. That's a different phenomena, but it has always been there as one of the oldest city.
Yes.
And so cities, then having this realization and then looking analytically, it further reinforced my interest in it, that fine, I mean I can continue with it. So about the encyclopedic and an archivist aspect, I didn't plan it that way, but now most lately, Hans also pointed out once, and I started thinking more consciously about it. Yes, this aspect is pretty much there, even if I don't do anything about it. And in times to come, how this, for example, this image or any other works like Desperately Seeking Paradise, which has almost literally all the images of houses of Lahore, will serve as a record of that time, even if the work doesn't offer anything else in the future. This will be there, but I haven't done any methodical mapping of these subjects, except this recent series, language series. We don't have actually the most recent ones, which I have been working on in the last a few months. You will see some of those at India Art Fair. There was a deliberate attempt to record and document all the texts that existed in a given year in the city and its vicinity, in the form of signboard or wall chalking or political posters or anything that was there as a text, as an image. It was recorded, and I was quite conscious of the fact that beyond whatever I'm trying to do at this point, this will be a documentation, an archive of how the language as an image is embedding so much of the cultural history in it, and something that is seen kind of a literal reference and often looked down upon in contrast to a poetic abstract image, is actually so much coded in it in terms of meaning.
Right.
So
can I interrupt you and just ask you, do you think, because you work consistently with this sort of micro level, which builds up this macro image, maybe one image, do you think for the audience it would be necessary to understand what the starting points are, because they're in a sense seeing an end point?
Right.
And I remember Art and Language
Right.
talking about the idea of the label. They said there are two ways to look at artwork. Once you look at the artwork and then you go to the label,
Right.
or you start with the label and then you look at the artwork.
Right.
In that sense, it seems to me that there's a sort of a secondary narrative in how you compose, which is so important in the way that what the narrative is driven by. There's a kind of underworld, as you suggest, of text or of housing development, which to a certain extent maybe we are not getting the ability to understand, and that in a sense propagates why the grid is important in your work, because it allows all of these things to be embedded and building up an image. What do you feel about those sort of?
Talking of grid, my initial interest was extremely formal.
Yes.
In grid, and then perhaps I couldn't do justice to that formal interest, and I didn't pursue it as a deeper exploration. And because my interests changed, and I became interested in so many other things, representations, which sort of consume the conceptual and mental space of these works. However, it still remained a feature of my work, just like this device of conceptual and formal device of micro and macro image, because my interests are varied. And I made one decision back in the mid-90s that I'm not going to draw a hard line between whether I'm a conceptual artist or formal artist, or divide between the intellectual and the personal, and then public and the personal, and so all these divides to me seemed very limiting, and I just wanted to not filter any of these diverse interests and references. So therefore these two devices of grid, the matrix and the macro and macro image, they provide a framework and to hold all these diverse interests together. And about the interest, about the relationship of small and large, it also has been, although it seems consistent in last 10 years that I have sticking to this device, but it has evolved from within as to how the relationship of small and large plays its part in my works from 2002 to 2005 or 6, which is more to do with very obviously popular images, and then later on more familiar images, and in more recent works which you have yet to see, I'll talk a little bit more about it later. It plays a different role. But if I understood your question correctly, you probably also wanted to know what comes first.
Well, in a sense, there is definitely an interest in street photography.
Right.
yeah, which is in a sense given,
Right.
because what you're doing is you're going around shooting in the street a lot.
Right.
And like all people in Asia at the moment, you are kind of preoccupied with internet.
Right.
So these are these two things, the street and the internet, that seem to be giving you an incredible amount of surge of imagery and ideas and content.
Right. Right.
So there's a kind of borderlessness and a bordered together happening, in the sense that there's a notion, what I think is that there are many dimensions which are happening in your works simultaneously. One which is about the local, which is also kind of, in a sense, I would also suggest a kind of notion of density which is happening in Asia. And what I mean by density is that the whole of Asia is being built and escalating at a level which is unprecedented anywhere on this earth. If somebody hasn't been there recently, you cannot understand how much has been built on, and how people are living in this very strange world. So there's an incredible amount of information going in, and I think you're also rescuing a certain amount of imagery, like this handwritten text will be absolutely got rid of within the next few years, with everything being printed, because printing is actually cheaper than handwritten now.
Sure.
So there's a whole historical development going on, which is also being followed up by your interest, because you are seeing this disappearance of a culture. So there is kind of a traumatic history which is being recorded, not only a political one, but also a popular one. Because so much which we grew up with has just disappeared in the last 10 years. A great decade, in a sense. So in a sense, what I'm trying to get at is, this archive is very important. When you talk about the destruction of a city, I mean, one look at Singapore, and one sees that there's hardly any colonial buildings left, because they broke them all down, and everything is skyscrapers. So you won't realize what has happened. And in a funny way, Pakistan, India, and even Bangladesh, I'm sure, is going through this radical departure from what it was. And I think it's incredible to look at that, because now that your work is becoming more and more globally available, people are maybe getting access to information which they normally would not have unless they actually visit the spaces. And at the moment, Pakistan is not on the travel itinerary of many people, as you know. But how do you feel about sort of representing so much of the changes?
One thing I would really like to clarify, that the first thing that you mentioned, the street photography and internet, is interesting that you mentioned, because I was just talking yesterday, I think during the talk, or how do we define locale now? And an artist's work is or writer's work is always basically a representation of his or her experiences, immediate experiences, and all those experiences could be of the locale, but locale, how we define is now is a different thing altogether. It's not just your political boundary, it's not just the country that you live in, it's could be your immediate experience of your physical surroundings, and what you receive through remote means, through internet or media, or that is equally real and equally important. And then this whole sense of local and global is constantly shifting, and it's not as separate as it seems. It's I may have much more in common than everybody sitting here, than maybe somebody sitting in some parts of Pakistan, so this whole local and global thing is I think is much more complex than that. And coming back to the other second part of your question, I want to clarify that I don't think of myself as an ambassador of Pakistan. I mean, I don't assume that role, and I don't take the responsibility. And if that aspect of it being an archive of a time, of my immediate surroundings in language series, or Desperately Seeking Paradise in terms of pictures of streets and surroundings, that is there with a very different interest, and if it provides some kind of archive, that's an added bonus. But I don't do it with the responsibility that I have to represent Pakistan or a certain time or era in that sense, and and also I don't have a very sympathetic view to changes that goes through. I'm all for change. I mean, there's much more detail to it. I don't want to generalize it too much. For example, I agree with you that the demolition of buildings, I'm not in the favor. But if the handwritten is disappearing and it replacing something else, that I think is perfectly fine, and that's a change that time has to go through. And so I'm not so sympathetic to the whole notion that these societies are changing for good or bad. Change is mostly as a whole, as a generalized statement, change is, I'm for that.
Good. All right, so we're kind of sort of heading to a point where we need to bring the audience in a minute. But I just wanted to end with just this idea of how do I find Rashid in the works? Because to a large extent, people always suggest that there's a kind of a complex division nowadays in the art world between the art and the artist. That more and more people are becoming enriched by the artist rather than the artwork. And this is something to do with the rise of the artist as a personality, more and more. And I know you said that you're not interested in being an ambassador. Regardless of that, to a large extent, as Kobina Mercer has suggested, you in a sense have to carry the responsibility of a culture that you come from, or you're made to. Basically, you're made to, even if you don't want to. Now, in a funny way, what I'm trying to get at is that you have your work, but you also have Rashid Rana. And there are these two very strange things that happen in the art world at the moment, especially because many people say, oh, that's a Rashid Rana, but they don't say, this is, let's say, The Plinth by Rashid Rana. So there's this notion which I started with the notion of the signature style. Do you think there's something which has happened in the art world as you've seen it over the last sort of, because you sort of growing into it in the last decade more and more, and seeing how complex and the divisions and different resources which are in Asia to the ones in North America, let's say, and how they make something comprehensive. Could you maybe talk about your own experiences as Rashid Rana within the art world and your images in the art world? I know this is a bit hard, but it'd be interesting to talk about how that happens.
I'm not sure if I understood your question entirely, but one aspect of your question is definitely the branding aspect. And I'll just take you back again into 90s until 98 or so, from 92, 90 onwards. When I look back at my practice, I discovered that I don't have a style. Not to have a style is perhaps my style. I mean, I just didn't plan it, but I was changing mediums all the time, depending on the need of the subject and the idea that I was dealing with. In fact, then Hamad Nasser once interviewed me after my 2000 series of paintings called Nonsense, and he titled that in piece as Serial Monogamy of Rashid Rana. So by 2002, I was quite aware of the pattern that existed in my practice of somebody who does not is not trying to confine his practice to a particular style. And then came this work, I Love Miniature, the first one of this mosaic series.
Right.
And it came, it's interesting because I feel that this work, I Love Miniature, I just look at this, most of the things I find it very difficult to narrate things in a paragraph, or I think things diagrammatically. So I'm going to give you a diagram, like this hourglass, that's what you call it, this watch?
Yeah.
So it kind of becomes narrow. So all of my practice became sort of, you can say that the tip point is I Love Miniature, this piece, which is not here in this exhibition, but some of you might be familiar with. And then it opened up into the reverse triangle. So this is how I look at my career now when I look back and I analyze it. So I Love Miniature was some kind of epiphany where a lot of things happened. Right. For one, I sort of find a way of, as I was saying earlier, bringing my diverse interest into some kind of language so that it becomes less confusing for the viewer to relate to certain things, and then keeping lots of things constant and few variables.
Right.
So, but when I first made that work, you find it interesting maybe that I didn't make a work like that for about a year and a half or so. Because after that, right, there was a desire, somehow I was telling myself that not to have a style is my style. And as a result of the analysis that I did of my patterns and practice, it was quite silly and stupid, because it took me to realize for a year and a half that I'm predictable. I'm being predictable now to myself by telling that not to have a style is style. So I said, whatever my instincts are saying, I must go for it and just go ahead and make all the works. And there was no stopping. I thoroughly have enjoyed last 10 years working with this so-called signature style, and then it came with that limitation, you want to call it, the branding aspect you want to call it. So I think in two ways. Now I think that people must think, I'm often in my head, the cynics live in my head, and although I don't put myself in any category of a commercial artist or somebody who's just working for the grants, and I just keep my process very natural, and whoever I am, and without any uncomfortable relationship with anything, even money. So I just thought, now when I think about it, I'll just tell you what was going on in my head with regards to, very honestly, the branding thing. I know it has become a signature style, and if I continue with it, that I'm going to, then people might think, some cynic circles, that this guy is just playing to the market because this is his style. But I know that there's much more within this that I want to do. Right. And so I'm going through this struggle that how it will be seen. So
well, can I just interrupt you and just suggest that the room at the which is the name of the gallery? I think the mezzanine gallery, yeah, has got this duality between what I call the sort of work that comes out of barbarity, right, which is the red carpet and the veil, right, to the other side, where you have this sort of relationship back to Rothko, right, and to a kind of a genuine attempt to think about the notion of the surface in terms of the skin as an organ. And you succeeded in those two, if we look at the difference, which is from 2007 to 2010,
right,
where you're using the same sort of patina in making the work, right, but it is expressing two very diverse and very interesting levels of expression of the body. So I hope that you do carry on. Right. As much as we all think about the notion of signatures, there's so much diversity within a specific language that an artist develops that the imagination is carried with it. And at that level, I would just like to ask if the audience would like to ask Rashid some questions at this point. Please.
Yes, sort of continues on from my question of last night regarding the 2D to the 4D, well, 3D, 4D in terms of time-based imagery for the future. It's been documented that people's attention spans are a lot shorter now in terms of taking, because we want instant images, which we read instantly, and then which make us safe and don't challenge us. Do you find that that can be a restriction in terms of how you set out your work, your working practices, and what you hope to achieve? And maybe that's possibly why, I don't know. I simply find myself that I'm looking more towards, from photography, towards video myself, rather than just painting, what I used to do. And that's partly my answer to that, because people want to see things faster.
Yeah, actually, I've been very much aware of this fact, because I myself has a very little attention span. When I go to see shows, and if there's any long duration video works, I'm confessing here that I don't spend time with all the video works, and I do see that as if not a problem, but a challenging aspect of video art as a phenomenon, if it has to continue or evolve, and this is coming from a person who.
By the way, you have made video work yourself.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That's exactly what I was going to say. That's coming from a person who himself has made few video works. But I was very conscious of that. If you remember the work that you included in the show, 53 seconds on a loop, and I made it like a game, playful game, in which just like newspapers, you find differences between the two images. So this is a video called 10 Differences.
Yes.
And so I have been conscious of so the piece, this one, and the other one, Meeting Point and Departure Lounge, rather ambitious 6-channel video installation. They deal with the idea of stillness also, and the work that I'm making these days, you will be soon seeing it in any art fair and some new exhibitions to come in the near future. You will be seeing works which kind of bridge the conventional two-dimensionality, hunk object on the wall, and a moving image. So I do work with this concern, and I'm quite and this is why most of my mosaic series, I wanted the large image to be as simple as possible. Just like a billboard, when you're driving, you're looking at an image, you don't have to spend hours to register it, and if there's any meaning that you want to engage with, any other thing, it can come later. So this has been a part of a conscious sort of strategy, and it will remain a strategy perhaps for some time with the so-called video works that I'm working on. I don't know whether we should call it video works as well, the nature of what you're going to see.
Anybody else? Please.
Hi, Rashid, you mentioned that Pakistan is complex and multi-layered and is a miniature version of the rest of the world. However, I can see in the rest of the world, through the limitations of the media, is a country which is in turmoil, where the intellectuals are suppressed, where you get suicide bombings, you have assassinations of people like Benazir Bhutto and Salman Taseer. And in that context, do you feel optimism for the future of Pakistan, or do you think there is still a way to go?
What I was trying to say, that it's not it's no different than the rest of the world. So if I have to be optimistic about Pakistan, I have to be optimistic about the globe also. And I don't think it's in turmoil more than the world is in turmoil. I don't think it's the way it's presented as a very separate entity. That's not the case. And sorry, please go ahead.
No, just kind of a reflection. I think the issue actually is when you are in Pakistan, it's completely different. Although the kind of media coverage that we have here, it's blown up to such a degree. There's like murders that happen here, people dying all the time. I think it's the way it's reported. Sorry to interrupt, but carry on. No. Yeah.
But I think it's
No, but there are certain news which were correct, and certain things did happen at the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. They were things which one does not celebrate, but I don't think they're so radically different than rest of the world. That's what I was trying to say.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, I would agree that there are themes that are happening. What's happening in Pakistan is very similar. So if we think about human rights abuses, you can locate those in other contexts as well. And I think there is a danger about how Pakistan is portrayed in the West and to what end it's portrayed in that way. So I think it feels a little bit like there's some kind of legitimacy or some arguments being built up for America to have some kind of further control of Pakistan. Sure. So I think in that interest we are seeing a very negative picture of Pakistan. But at the same time, I do think for the everyday person in Pakistan, it's a complex and very difficult place to live. So yes, there are human rights abuses everywhere, but in Pakistan these things are very concentrated and very difficult for people. So what happens with Salman Taseer, I think that's a really good example. And Pakistani Christians, so how minorities are dealt with there, I think they have a much harsher time than minorities have here, even though, yes, as a minority we can talk about difficulties in our rights and recognition here too. So I think I agree with you to some extent. Yes, it represents global themes, but I think
I also agree with myself to some extent. I mean, yeah, absolutely. There are problems. I'm not saying everything is fine there. There are problems, but the singling out of those problems is something that I have a problem with. And there are human rights abuses. There are in India as well. In lots of other developing countries, there are lots of issues. And it's just, as you pointed out yourself, for certain political and larger geopolitical purposes, how the media manipulation is done, and that we have to be careful and aware of. And I'm sorry.
The other side of that coin that we have to be careful about is not to use the argument that because it happens everywhere, it's kind of
no, absolutely, absolutely. One can discuss those issues if the focus is in a given forum or a session. If a focus is Pakistan, so those things can be discussed and into details, but not in a generalized sort of statement way. And there are absolutely what has happened in the way I see it. For me, if there's problems of Pakistan have to be discussed, and something has to be done by people if they're sympathetic outside Pakistan, is to help restore democracy in that country. That is our key problem. All the problems are byproducts of this problem. That is not often discussed. That is not often discussed how the rest of the world or certain powers for their interest does not let that happen. So that is where the problem lies, and as a result of the worst period of dictatorship in Pakistan, that's Ziaul Haq in the 80s, that has done so much damage. The Tasir incident is, everything goes back and you can link it with that. It's just so time and time it haunts us, the ghost of Zia. It keeps on coming back, and there is a wave of conservatism. But having said that, at the same time, people are not aware that despite this growing, relatively speaking, right-wing middle class, but in, these days, 10 years back or 5 years back or even last elections, people vote for the most liberal party in Pakistan. People voted for Benazir's party, and that is his views are secular, they're liberal, and that means majority of the Pakistan is like that. That is a proof. Nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about that. But unfortunately, what my observation is now, we'll see in the next elections, in whatever this limited democracy that we have, the next election you will see there's a bit of a shift actually, and Tasir incident was a sign of that. Yeah. And there is a group which is not extremist, but they are more towards the center or the left of right wing kind of approach is as a whole is changing.
Just to add to this, Farid Zakaria from CNN suggested recently that the problem that we're looking at, especially in countries which have this relationship to Islam, is not necessarily that it's the Islamicization which is problematic, but it is how, in a sense, we're backing that which is already entitled. And what he meant by that was that there's a kind of conservatism which you mentioned. There's a relationship to corruption, and there's a relationship to control as power. These are the things which are creating the violence and which are creating a sense of entitlement. For instance, how there has been one family basically ruling Pakistan since independence, which is similar to what has happened in India. And in that sense, it creates a sense of entitlement not only in terms of class, but also in terms of caste in India. And I think we need to look at that complexity because it doesn't follow the same ruling as what happens in Europe, but it is very, very specific to what's going on in Asia and in certain parts of Southeast Asia. I just wanted to touch on this idea. Can you do this exhibition in Lahore?
Yes,
you can.
But I would not show Whale series to everybody, and I'll tell you my reasons for that.
Right.
I will do a bit of self-censorship because we do this all the time. Constantly go through. Since Zia's time, that's the time when I grew up in the 80s, and we learn how to say whatever you want to say and then yet protect yourself. Right. And so Whale series I would not hide or show in a limited audience because people will have objection to it. I don't know if people even from the street will have a problem with it. It's the media, aggressive right-wing media, which can make a story out of it, or certain quarters, some certain minority which can make a problem out of it. Having said that, I have taken calculated risk. I did not abandon the idea of making this work. I did make this work, I did show this work. I know that the consumption of contemporary Pakistani art has a very funny route these days. Mm-hmm. And often this question is raised, who is your audience? And although that question has a very different, I think, situation now, because there is an element of export. Contemporary Pakistani art is about 15 or 10 of them. They do exhibit their work overseas, but it does come back either physically or in form of internet. So certain circles who do follow art, they know what you're doing, but it's not a simple case of making work for some other audience. And going back to the issue of the governments in Pakistan, the legacy of a certain family, I respectfully disagree, because nobody would support the sort of whole idea of a dynasty system in the politics. But our problem is they haven't ruled. They have not ruled Pakistan. In Pakistan, civilians were never given a right to rule Pakistan. They probably even civilian governments have come into power for I think less than 20 years, and that too like for 2 years and 2.5 years, and they were kicked out of the government, or even when they are in the government right now, it's been 3.5 4 years, they don't rule, they don't have the power. I don't have to mention where the power lies, but civilians have never been given the, so it's a and if democracy was given the chance, and let's say if there's a family which is kind of leading a particular party in Pakistan, that will change with 2-3 elections, it will filter out, and the whole system will evolve. And right now actually when Zardari made Bilal Bhutto as the party chairman after Benazir's assassination, one immediate thought that came to my mind was the same what you were saying, that what is this propagation of sort of a continuation of legacy of dynasty, we're not living in a kingdom. But I think it was a technically very good decision, because since Bhutto's murder, judicial murder, certain forces, right wing and other non-civilian forces, they have tried their uttermost to somehow break this power of people, which actually has manifested itself in the form of People's Party, the Bhutto's party, and they represent the liberal and the open-minded 70-80% of Pakistan, and the non-democratic forces have tried their uttermost to somehow get rid of it. They get rid of the Benazir Bhutto because that way certain fractions of the party, they might disintegrate in struggle of power, but having nominated, that's the paradox, Bilal Bhutto, it keeps it intact. So there is a paradox. I mean, I hate it just the way I hate patriotism, and yet I watch cricket match and clap when Pakistan wins against India. So these are the kind of dualities.
I bet you do.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I admit, I make work about it, and yeah, so it's not, there is a paradox there.
Let me just take a second question from a man with a checkered shirt.
In terms of, you spoke about sort of being a global primarily, the Veil series, in terms of it not being shown in Pakistan, I understand some of that, but what I'd like to know is what drives, or what is the relationship you see between micro and macro in that sense?
Sure.
Bear in mind the macro images and cultural views, religion that lies behind that, and some of the beliefs behind that, because though it's not shown in Pakistan.
It was shown in Pakistan. As I said that we did not. Yeah, sure.
Pakistan culture and religion reaches much wider in Pakistan. And for us, I say us because I'm the chairman of the London Exchange. And within the context of the exhibition, it sits within a community that has sort of Pakistani citizens. And there are wider connotations in terms of its showing possible. As you say, some people might take a view on that. So I'd just like to know what you see the relationship between, or what drove you
Sure.
in that sense to choose those subjects in that way.
There's another paradox here. Though Pakistan was made in the name of religion as a political sort of strategy, and which was hijacked because the political strategy was to use religion to create a homeland where they wanted to protect, and have power or whatever, the combination of it. And then that was hijacked by right-wing forces, and they have played that card until now in Pakistan, and religion becomes a big thing, synonymous with Pakistan. Islam becomes synonymous with Pakistan, which is the paradox lies is that it is so must be humiliating for people of who are non-Muslim in Pakistan. Pakistan is not just Muslims. There are minorities. There are significant minorities who are from other religions. So often, we sort of associate Pakistan only with Islam. So that's one thing I would like to say. Secondly, Veil series was shown in Pakistan when I first made this work for showing in India, and soon after, a month later, it was shown in Pakistan. Except that I just wanted to show it. I wasn't aware how it can make a story or scene. I didn't want to get any cheap publicity either. So we just showed it to a limited audience, and our audience, whether it's audience of 100 or 1,000 or 5,000 or 20,000, it is limited always. So I made that decision who's going to be the audience in that case. That's what I did, but all the art circles and design circles and circles just outside the art world are familiar with this work now in Pakistan. And about the other part of your question, which what I understood is you want to know my intentions behind making of this piece. Though the work seems to be about politics, but the way I approach most of my works, and when I say these images are politically charged, I tend to be making work about politics, but my intention is to focus on the representations, and those representations have political sort of linkages, but I don't approach those politics directly. I just enter them through the representations that represent them. So looking at the images in the post 9/11 world of veiled women, whenever there's a news in the media, Western media in particular, I'm referring to new media like Fox News, etc. There will be always, whenever there will be a Muslim country or Pakistan, or there will always be an image of a veiled woman. So it's a very simplistic sort of representation, which is not the case, and it's limiting. And similarly, there's a very equally narrow representation of women from the Western world through pornography, which is the most accessible visual medium in the world at this point. And and I remember in the 80s, growing up in the 80s, I heard stories during the time of VHS, VCR tapes, and there are remote areas of Pakistan or lots of other countries where there's no electricity, but men through the use of a tractor battery, they would attach it and then make it happen and to watch pornography. Pornography is a very much demanding. Anyway, so that is also narrow sort of representation in the minds of I guess suppose men who would think that if they travel to West, as soon as they land, there'll be people having sex on the streets. So I just thought this two limiting and narrow representations of same woman is basically the same thing. This sounds to be on a very extreme side, and but they no different. So if I have to, I cannot take a role of a preacher and then make a speech and talk about it. I just thought if we see them always in different domains, both these kind of images. If they bring them together, that's all I'm doing. I'm just bringing them together so that it opens up sort of a discussion in our minds that how they can effectively, if not destroy, somewhat damage each other.
Can I?
Yeah, please do follow it up.
Another question. Working along the same theme in terms of the contrast, the next piece or the other one, the three-dimensional one, Seeking Paradise. Is it Paradise?
Yeah.
Desperately Seeking Paradise. It's a title of a Pakistani British writer. His book.
The photographs in the micro again deals with photographs of Lahore, and yet the cityscape is an economic one, the economic centre.
Sure.
And the prominence that you get from standing back is of the Twin Towers. And it's a year after that piece was created. And is it 9/11? Sorry, it is a year after. We had the New York situation and all of that post 9/11 that occurs. But it's interesting, again, using the same theme as in the desire of a sexual nature in terms of the male desire with the veil piece, and then at the end the image of a Western side when they simplify Islam in terms of visual. Visual for us, economic centre, and again you've depicted Lahore as the micro, so it's a juxtapose of the two sort of similar images, or two images, one from an economic developed world and one from an aspiring side to connect the two. So fine, yeah, I'm comfy with all of those. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yes, sorry.
Just looking at your work, the recent work, especially the three-dimensional ones also, it reminds me of your intake in your travels, you know, I noticed that you mainly photographing the cities, but I'm seeing in the three-dimensional work some nature coming in. And I just wondered, so far you've only concentrated on cities. I wondered, since your travels, whether landscape also might be filtering into your new work that I haven't seen yet.
I'm deep down, I'm a traditionalist. I do believe in the subject matter of landscape that has now transformed into urbanscape and still life, which now appears as an object, theme as an object in my work, and then figure, you know, more as a body. But talking of nature, it's how one defines nature. I'm not a naturist in the definition word of the word. I just think that, you know, whatever even is evolving and growing in urban centers, if you look at from far macro level, it is also nature. I have a broader sort of view of that. But in terms of you know, being a naturist, I'm not going to go outside the city and portray landscape. In fact, I've made a work called A Day in the Life of Landscape, which is not in this exhibition. It was made by an artist named Khalid Iqbal in Pakistan initially, in the 1980s during Ziaul Haq's period, which I mentioned earlier. All what flourished in terms of art during that era, or what was given patronage, was landscape painting and calligraphy. So I made a work, I remade that image with the help of images of the city, within the city, roads at all different times, and I took those photographs and assembled them as one of Khalid Iqbal's landscape, who also lived in the same city where I live, but he chose to travel to the periphery of the city with his back facing the urban Lahore, and then framing something which looked like rural Punjabi landscape, and claiming that that's true Pakistani, and painted that in impressionist style, which is a late 19th century French way of painting, and that group of artists consider people like me westernized. So I think of urban centers as part of nature.
To clarify my question, you know, when I saw your pen and the phrase,
right,
what I'm seeing is that when I travel, when I'm on the plane,
yeah,
you see clouds.
sure.
So I'm seeing
I see.
Elements
Okay.
of that experience. So
Maybe it's the softness that Shaheen also saw.
You becoming soft.
As opposed to hardcore,
which he dealt with at the back.
Well, I was suggested last night by a very involved discussant that how it's okay if you made this work, fine, but how about if you had used softcore porn as opposed to hardcore? So my friend who was standing there, she said it would have been a soft comment as opposed to a hard comment. The faculty, most of the faculty at that time.
And it's the opinion of some that in contemporary art, we're still suffering the hangover of conceptual art with the idea of criticality. And I wondered what you thought about this and how you thought it's important to develop away from this or towards the art of the future.
Interesting. I am very self-conscious. Not that it would help, when the time will come, it will happen. I'm self-conscious of the fact that, you know, all artists at some point in their career, they do get fixated with some idea, and then they stop growing. And when it happens with somebody, they themselves can never find out, and it happens to everybody. If it has come in my career, I'm not aware of it, and if it's come in the future, let's see what happens. About my interest in conceptualism, in fact, it happened during my studies in the North America. I was inspired by neo-conceptualists. Peter Helley was the forefront of that movement as an artist, and also a person who wrote a lot about it. And it somehow suited my sensibility, because my own ideas and practice and approaches were also growing in that direction, because it's that kind of conceptualism sort of totally frees you from relying on stylistic conventions or appearances. It is sort of because appearances are deceptive, and the content lies beneath the surface. So the chances of it leading to any kind of conformity and conforming to certain kind of thing are much less than that of modernism, which which is, I think, holds different school of thought. So that's one thing. And secondly, while I was looking at those works, and when this approach of mine was developing into more conceptually led practice, I was also dealing with this major issue, which hasn't come to discussion luckily today, but it is often discussed, the identity, the whole identity business. It has come, but not in a direct fashion in this conversation. But I grew up artistically as an artist in the 90s, worrying too much about it. I was totally wanted to reject it, but even that kind of strong feeling of rejecting it was in a way acceptance. I just realized that if you're an artist from the third world, or writer or creative practitioner, there is no escape from that question of identity. So you'll have to deal with it head on, or by negating, or whatever your strategy is. And I realized that my strategy, which developed with that time, to engage with a conceptual practice, because what it does is, even if there is a issue of identity in my mind, it gets documented critically in terms of my thinking, which becomes part of my work. So being critically engaged with the question of identity becomes your new identity. So that's why making conceptual art as a strategy is kind of has suited, and it has, to me, more room for always evolving and growth, rather than conforming to a certain kind of styles, or thinking what modernism did. That's how I feel. But if I'm a prisoner of certain thinking or time, I will think harder about it later on.
Sorry, could I ask Shaheen's answer as well, that question?
Well, it's a bit perplexing, the question, I must admit, because I think we've reached a certain point where possibly we've outgrown what is going on around us. And what I mean by that is incredible amount of publications, incredible amount of art fairs, incredible amount of biennales, incredible amount of exhibition making, but most of it of really bad, badly curated, badly put together, badly thought through, badly proofread. And a lot of what's going on, 80%, is not very good. And I would say the other 20% is on the borderline. And that's a kind of mundane observation of what's going on. I do go to different countries and have a look. And I think we have come to a point where we're asking more of why this has happened, and what is the artist's responsibility in participating in such a systematic way of not being comprehensive about the world that they're supposed to be experiencing and relating back to the larger community, the larger audience. So I think we have come to that point now, and the community of viewers are much more aggressive, much more interrogative about what is culture, especially visual culture, at this particular point when the world is collapsing around them. And how come visual culture is so much part of a line of production, right, rather than a line of knowledge? And these are things which worry me a great deal. And that's why I think we respond back to artists who are looking, as you suggested, to the notion of the local, in sense of being embedded in looking at what is around them, to be able to make a point about towards a wider perspective, a wider idea of what the world is about, what the notion of globalization means. Because we haven't got an idea of what it really means. We hear it, but we don't really know what it is. And it's not something that just started in the 80s, this is something that started in Victorian times. So, and all of this porosity of Hong Kong Art Fair and Singapore Art Fair and freeze, and all of these things, they still don't give us the criticality, the ability to understand what is going on. It's production of objects rather than production of knowledge. So that's where I am at the moment with my ideas of what is going on in terms of the contemporary, which you're talking about, I think. The contemporary status of culture.
Isn't that a good place to be, a place of questions?
Einstein always said never stop questioning.
Yeah.
But it's not that the questioning has stopped, but the questioning has been so rudimentally base or basic. That's worries me a great deal.
Do you mean, for example, the artist always has to speak as from Pakistan?
No, he should be able to. He should be able to speak from Pakistan or from Nottingham.
Pakistan, I suppose. You know, he's one of the artworks that I found very interesting is the fridge, and for me that resonated with Duchamp's urinal. And when you talked about being influenced by conceptual art, I wondered if, you know, there was not a strand of, you know, the modernist history within the piece and the simplicity of the product, which is going away from the political art that you did earlier, and also towards a new conception of ourselves in a global world. You know, all of our identities are potentially up for grabs, if you like, but this is where the artist's playfulness is an exciting place to find yourself.
Who's grabbing? That's what I'm worried about.
Oh, right, so then
Yeah.
can you say more about that?
Well, who's grabbing? Literally. I mean, think about it. At the moment, artwork is substantiated by what it features in the art world. I was with a group of Chinese artists in Beijing who were looking at where they find themselves in performance artists, find themselves in a group of artists of how much they're worth, and if they're in the top 10. This is how art is substantiated. And this is absolutely worrisome. Most artists who are now graduating at art college think they should be with a gallery within the next year, and they've failed if they're not. They don't even think about a studio practice. They don't even think about making work, they think about how to sell work. The goals have shifted in the last 10, 15 years to an extent we don't recognize part of what that project is of making art anymore.
But money has always been some odd way linked with art, always. There is an element of patronage. And
sure, but money is not the end.
Absolutely,
You know,
but
that
that patronage is always required. And fine, and now we have to see this whole thing in a larger picture that we live in a capitalist world.
We always have.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we haven't.
And this whole system that we are part of, the galleries and the, you know, all the professionals and players that are involved in this larger scene of art scene, it is all you know, a 20th century phenomena, you know, under the larger umbrella of the capitalist economic system. So I think they both have, it cannot evolve into a totally different animal altogether on its own.
No, but the most outstanding piece of artwork at Venice was a barge or a boat placed in front of the Gardenia, which is owned by, I think, Abramovich for his party. It was substantially overshadowing the whole Venice Biennale. Now, when you have that as an object to contemplate in relationship to what's going on as two exercises in exhibition making, then you have a substantial idea that it has shifted, the ground has shifted to the likes of Elton John and Abramovich and Pinault being the people who are holding the streams of what is going to happen. And I think these end results have become the end results of artistic discourse. And that's, for me, has become very, very obvious in the way that collectors and artists have become.
But it's good that it's become obvious.
It's
so we see it as a more transparent thing, and we know what to judge and where to form our opinion.
But I think, for instance, the Russian pavilion at Venice Biennale is funded by an individual and not by the state. So it's no longer the state representing its content, but an individual choosing the content of a state. And that is a big shift. And I think this is a shift which has not had, we haven't been able to work out its eventual effects. And I think these are the things which also worry me in Asia, because the Chinese artist has just become the most auctionable artist in the world, which nobody has heard of before, more than any Duchamp, any Warhol, anything. So that history of art is now so affected.
This is more of a critical view of the art market, and one should be critical, why not, and cynical at times. But I mean, one also has to see, because I always into seeing flip side, the other side, or the dual side of things. I was just recently thinking of since you mentioned and you wanted to touch upon this, my presence in the Indian art scene. I was embraced as one of their own, and I indebted to the Indian art scene for many things that has happened in my career, because they had a very strong infrastructure of the as compared to Pakistan, which has helped me to be sitting here today. And but there's another aspect. Often in the circles which are not supposed to be, which are not commercial, which you would recall that they don't have to take that pressure of the who's paying for it, and or the play to the needs of the market, such as curators, independent curators, but those are the ones who are curating national survey shows, and national survey shows are a very problematic area, because they harden these boundaries. And whereas this, on the other hand, if I compare it with the art market, which is a strange kind of animal, but it is also based on a lot of, there's a bit of a democracy about it. And right, I mean, we can say there's shitty work is going for that prices, but there is some tiny positive side to it. There's a bit of a democracy in it, and it's not extremely cynical. And as a result, I was embraced as an Indian artist. And when I say Indian, not in the sense that a passport Indian, nationality Indian is a larger region. Just the way Paris was the center of representing a larger region of Europe around the turn of 19th century. Now the world we live in, its borders are much more harder, and the boundaries and political borders and passports are very much important. I enjoy when those borders are like sort of diffused, and I'm seen as an Indian artist as a first step. I would not like to be seen a regional artist, but at least it expands that, and that came not from the curators, who the other side of the art market, the opposite of commercial. They were being more, I think, limiting in that sense, rather than the art market, which put me in a totally different position.
And here we hasten to this.
That is the paradox.
Well, that, just to add, I'm sorry to say, but that paradox at the time of the attack on Mumbai changed, because 3 shows from Pakistan were cancelled in India.
Sure.
Yeah, because they felt those artists from Pakistan could not be shown in India at that point. So in that sense, they play along to what is viable.
State did.
There's a calculated risk, as you suggested, not only of showing what you can do in Pakistan, but also what you can do in India.
Right.
Because the whole M.F. Hussain thing,
right,
which is an artist of Indian origin who had to end up being
in exile.
In exile, living in exile, because his work was attacked and his exhibitions were attacked in India. He's a preeminent artist. So India flips as it suits it.
Yeah. No, but my comment wasn't about India.
Yeah, but what I'm suggesting is that this is the paradox of, I think this is where the market can control and does control what comes in its own borders, depending on what is going around it and what the political arena it enters into. So for instance, I think someone like Bani Abadi, who lives in
India now,
in India now, also found it very difficult in the beginning to be accepted as an artist from India.
But I didn't. Now she's a close friend. She didn't want to be seen as an artist from India either.
No, but to be even shown in India, although she was living there.
No, she has shown very successfully there.
Recently.
She's represented there.
Very recently.
What I'm trying to say is that there's not everything negative about the current infrastructure of the art market. There's certain things which are even more democratic than the other side, which is the curators, etc., they actually more narrow in their thinking at times.
No, I agree.
And
I mean, I think
money can do wonderful things at times.
And I think you're right to use the word paradox, because it really depends on the mood and the disservice and the service which is affordable at that point.
Sorry, can I just say, I mean, in terms of the whole Indian art market, I don't know, is it about 10, 15 years now that India has been part of this kind of global culture where celebrities, Christies go there and, support artists, and the market is open to wider collectors, but particularly Indian collectors. One of the largest sort of middle class in the world is actually in Mumbai. Now I was a student in India in the 80s, and there was no collector. There was no Indian collector at all.
And very few skyscrapers too.
Yeah, I mean, Salim, you remember as well. Coming to India during that time, it was very difficult for artists to kind of be even ambitious, and therefore there was this kind of idea of wanting to come to the West, and that whole kind of attitude has shifted now. So artists like Subodh and many other artists, before they even make the work is sold to an Indian collector, and there are many other museums now in India that are collecting. So I mean, that's a good thing, I think, in terms of this whole sort of if you want to call it capitalism.
One can look at critically also. There's a lot of money that has been pumped into the Indian art market, and then the arrival of so many art funds, and we all know what all they did. So despite, I mean, one has to be critical, one has to see those things, but at the same time, as a overall picture, I think it's done lots of positive things for the art scene. The way, even talking about Chinese contemporary art, at least some of the art may be really bad, and which is getting lots of prices, auction prices, but there is a lot which gets attention because of this overall phenomena. Indian art and Chinese art, they are at least being seen now.
No, they are, absolutely. All right, is one last question, because we have to close.
Can I just make one point?
Please.
Concerning your earlier mention about art and money. Actually, personally, I feel when we look at the history of art, initially there was no money involved. When you look at the living tradition of art in villages, in all cultures, I don't think there was any money involved there. So the money is more recent phenomenon which has developed over the last few centuries.
No, somebody must have got some money from the church to make something, and
talking about village art on the walls of a village in India, where you see folk art, or we call it folk art, but I find sometimes this folk art is much more loaded than I can think of anything else. Like, for instance, school paintings from West Bengal, images of Bin Laden's assassination, images of Mrs. Gandhi's assassination. So these are sort of more where this art has existed in spite of all the difficulties of life.
That is a different parallel stream, and whenever artists from the so-called the art world, when they try to mimic that or make a work which follows similar strategies, what happens in that case, then it is again brought back to the gallery. They want recognition in the end from their own circles. So they are two parallel running, I think, school of thoughts.
On that parallel.